History begins with the Empress demonstratively humiliated the young girl. Although the girl guessed that she was not called to say hello, a strong slap was surprised by her. The Empress Surov asked the girl who dressed her so much and, without waiting for the answer, shouted the offices to bring the scissors. The maid immediately executed the order of the Empress and the scissors. A few minutes later, the Empress had already made mercilessly cut the dress of a poor girl and laughing loudly. The Empress shouted that now this appearance is very much Estelle. The Empress sneered the scissors maliciously and quickly put them on the neck of a frightened Estelle. The woman straightened through her teeth that the girl should be no different from the dirty beggars that wanders the streets. Estelle, in a mutilated clothing, sat on the floor and thought that she needed to withstand it, and hoped that this terrible time would pass quickly and she would change something in her worthless life. The Empress looked at Estelle and smiled. After another humiliation of the girl, her mood improved again, and she shouted over her shoulder so that Estelle went and immediately dressed. Already in her room, Estelle sat on the windowsill and looked outside. She understood that she had to execute the order of the Empress and could not yet recover from shock after another humiliation of the woman. Estelle was tears in the eyes because she was sorry for herself. She thought that no matter how she was crying, these tears would not help to survive the hell in which she was in the imperial palace. Estelle was constantly threatened that she would be sold in a concubine, and therefore the girl had to endure the constant humiliation on the side of the stepmother, who simply hated her and considered it a disaster from which she could not get rid of. But the Empress with her abuse was nothing compared to her son, who also hated Estelle and in every possible case mocked her with special cruelty. Crown Prince Acelon put Estelle on his knees with incredible pleasure and forced him to lick dirt out of his shoes. He belonged to the girl no more than a personal slave. Estelle was so frightened that she begged the emperor on her lap not to sell her in a concubine, because she believed that it was hell compared to foreign slavery was a much better place. But the emperor only threw it so much that Estelle fell on the floor. He strained through his teeth that if she wants to leave the status of a princess, then he should at least learn to obey. Emperor Haston closed his eyes to how they treat his native daughter, pretending to know nothing, and the poor girl has never dared to call him a father. The mother of Estelle was a very beautiful woman who was famous for her beauty for the whole empire. That is why she was violence from the emperor, as a result of which Estelle was born. The child was born under the conviction and pressure from the imperial family, but despite this, the mother always loved her daughter and treated the girl well, giving her all her free time. After the terrible day when Estelle's mother died, there was no one at all. And in this huge imperial palace, Estelle was always alone. Every evening, the girl looked out the window with hope, hoping for some miracle, because to be in this hell became more unbearable. Estelle no longer has the strength to endure constantly mocking. This depressing cycle of humiliation was constantly repeated. But Estelle believed that there was a way to escape from this damn hellish punishment, so the girl hoped that she would be able to take this chance. There was a legend that when a full moon in the middle of winter appears in the sky, an ice palace should appear. It was in this palace that the demon slept firmly for many thousands. The legend was known to every inhabitant of the northern continent, but no one dared to go to this palace for fear for their own life. But Estelle thought she was still losing nothing. The legend stated that when to bring a blue demon that slept in an ice palace a valuable gift, the demon would wake up from a long sleep and fulfill any desire. Although it was old, forgotten by God, legend and was a reason, which was not considered a simple forgotten fairy tale. After all, this castle actually appeared once a year in the winter sky of the Northern Empire. Estelle still dreamed of this adventure and found this castle. She admired his beauty for a while and then got a pre-prepared knife from her pocket. Estelle, without any hesitation, made cuts on their own hand and blood drops, which protruded immediately, began to drop on a white cover. At that moment, the girl was so nervous that she didn't even feel pain. The girl was out loud that the demon woke up if he really exists and is not really a fiction. At first she spoke these words somewhat timidly, and then shouted them. Estelle knew that it was necessary to sacrifice a fairly valuable gift. Therefore, she said confidently that there is nothing more valuable on this northern continent than she herself. Estelle was looking forward to some miracle, but did not happen. So she bowed her head and doomed that all this was in vain and was not worth expecting any miracle in this God-forgotten place. But then, unexpectedly, Estelle felt the aroma of flowers. She turned and saw the incredible beauty of blue roses that covered the whole earth around the girl from the snow. While Estelle was looking at this incredible beauty, a tall man with blue eyes was pulled behind her. He leaned over her shoulder and whispered that it smells well. The scared girl turned her head and looked to the young man in her eyes. Although she realized that it was possible a real demon, she could not do anything, because it was difficult to take a look away from handsome. Noticing the bloody hand of the girl, the young man took her and lifted her to his face. He first looked at blood drops on her palm and then began to lick them carefully. Breaking away from the bloody hand, the guy said that he is now a child of the Union of the People of the Desert and the imperial family of Hartan. He said that this was actually the most valuable gift on the continent. Estelle looked at her hand and noticed how the wound from the cut healed immediately. Then she looked into the young boy's eyes again and realized that she was a real demon. Therefore, Estelle decided not to delay the time and immediately asked for a demon the desire for which she dared to awaken it. The girl said she wanted to become an empress. Estelle added that as soon as she became the empress, she immediately sent to the hell of everyone who has bullied her all his life. The demon took her face in his hand and asked the girl whether she was afraid to conclude an agreement with him. The demon whispered that in exchange for her desire, he will take everything from her. But the girl confidently replied that she was already in hell, so she is not afraid to give him her body or her soul. The young man listened to Estelle's wishes and, leaning over her neck, bit her for the skin. Blood immediately squeezed from the wound and flowed on the gentle white neck of a young girl. The demon whispered that greets Estelle in hell. The country of snow and ice, hundreds of years with the northern continent. It was the Hartan Empire. No one wanted these frozen lands, so there was no fear of a foreign invasion of the empire. Because of this, the perennial Haranium royal family became extremely corrupt. The last glory of the royal family has not left the trace. Only the stench of the decline of the Haranium family flew in the air around the royal palace. And on Estelle Hartan, like the emperor's illegitimate daughter, also automatically resulted in a brand. The next morning, the princess woke up in her own bed because the bright daylight prevented her from sleeping. The girl immediately opened her eyes and looked around. Estelle immediately rose in bed and could not understand what was happening, because the last thing she remembered it was that she got into a snow-covered blizzard in the winter field last night. The girl decided to approach the window and see what was happening there. But when her gaze noticed the ice palace, which was in the sky above the city, she began to remember with horror everything that happened last night. The girl knew that an ice castle was just an instant illusion that appeared one day a year in a deep night. Therefore, Estelle could not understand why she still saw this castle in the afternoon. The scared girl began to look and noticed that on the table near the bed lay a knife she sacrificed herself to a demon, and so she recalled all the events last night very clearly. In her thoughts, the blue roses that blossomed on a snowy field were immediately remembered, the aroma that filled her breasts, and of course the man himself with blue eyes, from which she could not tear her look. She immediately remembered that the demon whispered to her, greeting her in hell. But the unexpected Estelle heard that the servants were knocking on the door to go to the room to the princess. The princess in a hurry hid the knife in the table drawer and shouted, giving permission to the servants to enter the room. The room included 3 maids, and behind them suddenly came in the male servant. The man in the clothes of the servants went forward and greeted Her Highness, informed Estelle that he will serve her personally from today. This man seemed very familiar. The man introduced himself, saying that his name is Sadal, and when the girl looked into his eyes, she almost lost consciousness because they were the same blue eyes she looked at last night. Estelle could not believe that the demon from the ice castle was now serving her, so she looked at him silently and did not know what to do. The girl did not understand whether to enjoy her or to fear the consequences. Estelle now realized that she really was able to wake up a demon from an ice castle yesterday and conclude an agreement with him. She was scared that she had made, but there was no way back. Estelle asked why they brought her a new servant. They replied that because of the personnel, they had to hire a male servant, and he promised nothing to concede his duties. Estelle suspected that this was not done in this without the antics, because Marta, the main maid, who was constantly tormented by the princess, would never allow to take a new servant under the pretext of lack of staff. Moreover, no one would be worried that Estelle lacked servants. But when the girl looked at the Satael, he put the index finger to her lips, showing her so that she no longer asked unnecessary questions. Therefore, Estelle decided to listen to the advice of her new servant and no longer questioned anything. The maids helped the princess wash, make a hairstyle, and dress in a new dress. After the well-dressed, Estelle was ready for the exit. The maids worshipped and left her with Sadal as a location. Only now the girl decided to find out the man what really was happening. Estelle immediately asked the demon what was happening here and how he managed to get into the royal palace, getting a job as a princess servant because it had to go through a series of long checks. Sadal, mysteriously smiling, said that he could do anything, so it did not make any effort for him, from this familiar voice in the princess' right blood in the veins. And while the young girl listened to the explanation of the demon, he continued to say that in order to help Estelle fulfill her wishes, a better role is not worth finding, because he will now be able to constantly be near the girl. Then Sadal approached the lost young girl, snorted her by her shoulders, and threw her on the bed. Looking into the eyes of Estelle, the man asked her, except for her, the role of servant did not like. Estelle did not expect her to handle so roughly, so she tried to get rid of his arms. The girl strongly pushed the demon who lounged over her. But all the attempts of the girl to push the demon were in vain, because he did not move out of place. Then Sadal only replied coldly that the girl calmed down. Estelle, as if fascinated, obeyed the demon. Sadal, feeling that Estelle no longer resists, leaning over her. When his face was minimal proximity to the neck of the princess, the demon inhaled her aroma and said he felt nothing better. Untouched. Estelle did not even know what to do in such a situation, because no man had never approached the princess at such a distance. Only the crazy rhythm of the heart and the blush on her cheeks treacherously gave her feelings. The demon did not need to explain anything, because he understood everything. Sadal knew that the girl was ashamed of his intimacy, but he could not act with him because Estelle was very attracted. Subsequently, Sadal lifted Estelle from the bed and suggested that she call it a straw. The girl dared to say that he stopped all her pranks and finally answered all her questions. Looking into the eyes of the demon, Estelle asked if he really came here to fulfill her desire. Sadal, without tearing his gaze, replied that it was for this reason that he got a job at the royal palace. Sadal skillfully took the girl in his arms and put her on his knees. The demon added that gradually, in no hurry, he will help the young girl to become the most influential woman in the Northern Empire. Estelle, with his heart fated, listened to his speech, but suddenly he added that if she wants to fulfill her desire today, he would gladly fulfill it immediately. The demon took the strand of Estelle's hair, breathed his aroma, and said that only her word is her word, and on the morning, instead of the flags of the royal family on the sticks, all members of the royal family would hang. His words were like honey, and Estelle never listened to his interlocutor with more pleasure than this demon. But thinking about his proposal, Estelle replied that it was not necessary to do so. The young girl did not want to get the empty shell of the royal throne. In fact, her desire was different, and she immediately decided to put all the dots above the "and" before the demon began to act. Estelle, looking into the blue eyes of the devil himself, said that she wanted to fully crush all those who humiliated her throughout her life and forced her poor girl to suffer constantly. Even Estelle, who was immersed in her reflections on her reign on the imperial throne, added that only when she puts on her crown with her hands, stirred blood of revenge, she will be satisfied. The demon listened carefully to her wishes, and a happy smile appeared on his face. Such plans for a young girl inspired the devil, and he already imagined what it really would look like. When the girl silenced, Sadal gently kissed her in an open neckline and said that she would do everything exclusively in accordance with all the wishes of the young girl, taking into account the smallest little things. Breaking away from the sweet body of Estelle, the devil looked into her eyes again and said that until all her wishes were fulfilled, Estelle would be his mistress, so he immediately proceeds to his ministry. Estelle, as if fascinated, watched the devil's actions, and he sweetly said that as soon as her goal was achieved, he would become the owner of Estelle and took it all, to himself. Sadal explained that the pure body of a young girl, her noble blood and her innocent soul, he will take it without any delay, because these are the terms of their treaty. The ice castle appeared in the middle of the day, and it was so unexpectedly sight that it was not possible to dream. After all, no one could imagine what this castle would see in the clear blue sky in the afternoon. Not only the Empire Hartan, but also the entire northern continent stirred from such an unusual phenomenon. Everyone realized that this castle could only be seen within an hour and at night. From rumors to the official press, everyone discussed this sight. Some argued that the end of the world would come, and some assured that this ice castle was associated with the onset of endless and long winter. But all who discussed this news came to think that an eternal ice castle in the clear sky is undoubtedly a mischievous prediction that awaits all the inhabitants of the northern continent. The emperor's office gathered a terminated meeting to discuss this spectacle. One participant said they could not be silent forever because many rumors spread about it. The emperor of the empire, Harton, Hastion de Harton, ordered to immediately invite all scientists who are well acquainted with the ice castle so that they may urgently begin research on this phenomenon. The emperor heard what this damn castle appeared right now, and why this castle, which has not operated for many recent millennia in the days of his reign. From the thoughts of the emperor, the distractions of Earl Bellew, who suggested the idea, to declare an ice castle with a prosperous prediction. The Hastona lifted his gaze and looked at the young Graf. Earl Bellew explained that numerous rumors have an icy castle from ancient times, and if the royal family declares an ice castle with a good prediction, then the rumors will quickly subscribe. In the conference hall of the emperor, all those present came to life and began to say that it is a fairly good offer and a Graf, as always different from others in his insight and a sharp mind. The emperor also said that it was a good idea and ordered an ice castle to be a good prediction. After the meeting, everyone discussed such a decision, because they doubted that the devil's house could be considered a good sign. The doubts visited almost everyone present, and they could not come up with another idea, so they considered it better than nothing. The minister saw Earl Bellew in a hurry. The minister asked where Earl Bellew was sent and suggested that he talk before leaving. But the count assured that he had urgent cases, and he has no free minute. The earl quickly folded the corridors and stopped only before the empress's personal rest. Having knocked on the door, Bellew asked permission to come, and on the doorstep he was immediately met by a friendly queen. Queen and earl exchanged rapid greetings and asked each other as they feel. After that, the queen ordered the maids to be left alone, and the servants immediately executed her order. As soon as the empress remained with Earl Bellew alone, she immediately rushed into his arms and their mouths united in a passionate kiss. It was evident that none of them was against such developments. After the kiss, the empress said that she was very missed by Earl Bellew, and he, looking into her eyes, replied that it had been a long time since their last date. The empress was visible in dissatisfaction with his answer, and reminded the earl that she repeatedly asked him not to talk to her so officially when they were alone. The earl apologized and asked the empress how Acelon felt. She smiled, asked why he was worried, and he answered that every parent should worry about his or her own son. In fact, Prince Acelon Crone was a child whom the empress gave birth not from Haston, but from Earl Bellew. Fortunately, the guy was born with the appearance similar to the empress, so no one suspected her in betrayal. Unfortunately, the beloved son of the Empress Acelon was not something which was shamelessly possessed by an illegally born girl named Estelle, because of which the empress simply hated her. After all, a young girl had a clear sign of the imperial kind of Harani, namely radiant hair, platinum color, and light green eyes, than all the descendants of this kind and different from others. As soon as the empress mentioned this princess, her mood was quickly deteriorated, and the only desire was to give this bad lesson a worthy lesson so that she did not forget about her shameless appearance. The empress, even forgetting her lover, shouted Marty's maids to enter the room immediately. As soon as the servant appeared, the queen screamed angrily to call her a princess. Meanwhile, in her room, Estelle asked the devil if he really was going, starting from today, to stay in office and stay with her. Sadel replied that of course it would be, and he would never leave her alone to maintain and manage her actions to get the desire he declared to him faster. Estelle, at the same time, noted that a person with an unknown status would not be able to stay in the princess's imperial palace as an accompanying one, and suggested that he find some other way. But Sadel, looking into her eyes, said that she had no doubt about his abilities, because no one would pay attention to it, and he had already caught everything. Their conversation was suddenly interrupted by the personal maid of the Empress Mard, who flew into the room and said that the princess immediately appeared in the room to her highness, because she was already waiting there. Only one of this request on the back of Estelle ran cold, because she knew what all these visits were constantly over, and tolerated another humiliation did not enter her plans. Satal saw that the girl was nervous, so he took her by her shoulders and whispered to the ear that the time she had to introduce him to those who were about to kill him soon. In the office of the Empress, the chamberlain announced that the princess had arrived at her, and after that the Estelle had boldly entered the office to her highness. Behind her was her personal servant, Sadel. The princess immediately noticed in the room of Earl Bellew, and then leaned and said that she was standing in front of Her Highness of the Empress, under the boundless glory of the Empire Hartan. But the Empress did not look from the young man who came with the princess. Ira, looking at the Satel from her head to her feet, asked Estelle how she managed to lure into the palace of this handsome man. The Empress said that Estelle was very similar to her vulgar and lusty mother, who was famous for the whole empire with her shameless behavior. Estelle silently swallowed the offensive delay of the queen. Still, the man continued to stand with his head lowered, so Era ordered him to lift his head. As soon as the blue eyes of Satala met with the Empress's gaze, the woman's all inside turned. The princess also noticed this view of the Empress, who shamelessly stripped the young man. And Her Highness, meanwhile, asked the princess who was this young man who was not suitable for Estelle. The Empress thought that she was the first man to keep with her and want him all night. From her lustful thoughts, she was ashamed, and a treacherous blush appeared on her cheeks. Estelle has never had to see the Empress so embarrassed, so she was in a hurry to explain that this boy was taken to work as a servant in the princess' palace. The Empress said they were free. Already in her room, flipping through the book, the princess reflected that she left the Empress's room for the first time in her life without humiliation and beating. Satal, meanwhile, put blue roses in a vase. The princess dared to ask him if he was going to seduce the Empress. Estelle was convinced that the queen was looking at the boy in vain. Satal just smiled and replied that if it was needed to achieve their goal, he would not stop before that, and asked the princess if she liked dirty methods. While the young girl was thinking about the answer, the devil added that he promised Estelle to make her empress, so in their business the means did not matter. The devil approached the girl and ran his finger on her face. He said that just killing them would not be enough, and asked Estelle woke him up not to be thrown into hell with him. The princess replied that as long as Sadel did her work properly, she doesn't care that he would do it. Still, she reminded that he decided to become his service. Therefore, looking at this, Estelle with confidence reported that Satal should obey all the orders of the princess. And when he replied that he would listen to her mistress, she asked her to call her a princess. Estelle closed the book and asked the devil at what reason he was trying to seduce the empress. Satal said that in order to get a crown, you need to enlist the support of others. And for this, Sadel said that they need to weaken the power of the empress, and the destruction of the union between the empress and Earl Bellew should be the first thing in their task. Estelle understood the feasibility of this proposal and agreed with such opinion. She said aloud that it would be difficult to destroy this connection because it has been going on for a very long time. Earl Bellew was an open lover Empress era, and although the emperor noticed it, but did not want to deal with these problems and ignored their relationship all this time. Estelle thought it was not important to pay attention to Aery himself, and Earl Bellew is still not a fool who could easily betray the empress. Estelle noted that the seduction of Air itself would not be enough, and then the devil suddenly suggested that the idea of attacking both parties at the same time to finally get success in this case. Estelle never knew what to expect from the saddle, and so his suggestions always made her suddenly. She didn't even know what he was thinking about, because she had never faced the devils before. Meanwhile, Sadel took the young girl by his hand and said that while he was understood with Empress Ira, Estelle should take on Earl Bella. From this Estelle did not. The young girl sharply took her hand from the devil's hands and said it was simply impossible. Then Satal looked at the princess and asked in surprise why she was thinking so. Thinking, Estelle replied that it was clear, because she has nothing to do so that he could attract such a powerful and corrupted Earl Bellew. The devil smiled and said if Estelle thought that he suggested seducing the Graf, and when the girl was red, he added that she would be quite attractive, but it would be enough to wake the devil. From these words her heart wool even faster. The young girl asked why the devil woke up. After all, she believed that she managed to wake him up to the devil only because she belongs to the Devers. Sadel smiled and asked if she did not think that there was still no Devers who would try to wake the devil. But no one but her managed to do so. The Devers tribe was the most rare tribe among the desert continent, which was famous for its unique abilities. They said that their flesh and blood had the ability to instantly heal even the most difficult wounds. It was such a miraculous power that people were looking for, and this led to the end of the whole kingdom of Deveraz was destroyed. The mother of Estelle, Ilyana, was the last princess of the dead Devers. The mother constantly reminded the girl that she never forgets that her veins were flowing royal blood, and asked her to find all the surviving members of their tribe, because it was her debt to the Devers. Hunting for the surviving divers forced them to live underground, so that no one could find out that they belonged to this mighty tribe. The same principle was governed by Estelle itself, and only those who truly belonged to the kind of divers should they know their true essence. But Satal noted that the fact that Estelle belongs to the divers, nothing means to him. Hearing this, the girl exhaled with relief because she thought it was the fact that she belonged to the divers and helped to awaken the demon. Then she said she didn't think she had some peculiarity. She was convinced that she did not have any healing qualities and especially some attractiveness, but Sadal only answered that the young girl knew very badly. And then the devil decided to translate the topic of conversation and, approaching the girl, asked if she would like to go beyond the imperial palace. Such a proposal seemed to the girl quite tempting. Without waiting for the final answer from the princess, the devil took her in his arms and went towards the balcony. She tried to deny him, asking him to wait and let her think a little. Once at the very land of the balcony, the girl was first scared, but then the devil whispered that she had nothing to worry and bent down. Estelle closed her eyes because she thought they would break now. Sadal felt the excitement of the girl and somehow to support her hugged more. She opened her eyes and looked around. They were currently in the night sky and were flying over their city. Estelle asked the devil where they were heading. He reported that in the monthly charade. The girl knew that it was the most elite tavern in the capital where all the aristocrats gathered to conduct the secret conversations. It was in the monthly charade that any information could be obtained. When they approached the elite kabak, Satael asked the girl to behave extremely carefully and not to provoke any provocation. The devil explained that he should buy some information about Count Bellu and also get something more that Estelle will need. But when they came to the door, they were greeted by hostile guards. The guard ordered them to stop and present the passes, because without them it was impossible to go inside. But the devil just clicking his fingers and forcing the men to stop and silence. Estelle looked at this sight and could not believe that at the request of Satael, men did not give any signs of life. The devil, smiling, said that she should get used to it. Walking past the frozen guards, Satal noted that from this point, Estelle should get used to the fact that all people will flatter the hereditary princess and worship in front of her. The girl thought with fear that for the devil it was only entertainment, and even her contract, which was concluded at the risk of her life, for Satael was worthless. The owner of the Taverna Moon Charada was the Marquise Parcel. It was known in the secular circles of a widow, which built a famous tavern for the wealth of her late husband. There was no man who would not know her. Having passed a few corridors that Estelle seemed to a real maze, she noted that they had not met any guard, and the devil reported that in fact the Marquise is only a mask that hides the truth. Having reached huge doors, the Sadal immediately opened them, and was in front of them a fairly spacious room. The devil reported that they had already come at the destination. The princess looked around with interest and noted that there are many bookcases in this room. There were also books on the tables, so the impression was that the princess had got into the library. While Estelle was looking at the room, a small boy with a pretty appearance suddenly approached her and began to consider Estelle herself. Then he said she looks appetizing. The gray eyes of the guy were just burning a young girl through, and she even got rid of it. Sadal immediately approached the princess and told the guy that he did not look at his companion so hard. The guy seemed to be offended and guilty to Satael that curiosity is his life without which he simply cannot exist. Therefore, he just needs to know who came to visit him. The boy again approached Estelle and looked into her eyes. He said that knowledge, consciousness, and memories are all that interests him in the world. The princess was surprised by the wise words of the boy. And the boy, meanwhile, walked around Estelle and looked from head to feet. Then he licked his lips and said that it smells good, so he was very pleased that Satals brought such a way to him. The boy's words were alerted to the princess, and she became even terribly from such thoughts of the little one. And the boy, looking at Satiel, asked if he would share such prey if he brought her here. But the devil was no longer going to endure the young man's arrogance, so he threw him away from Estelle. The boy was offended and asked what uncle he brought here a girl if he was not going to share with him. Holding his head and moving in pain, the guy asked the devil why he woke up and what he conceived this time. Sadal calmly replied that this young girl is now his owner. The boy shouted with surprise and asked the devil to conclude a contract with a man. He was so impressed that he released a book he had previously held. Sadal replied that it was. The princess removed the hood, from which thick strands of platinum hair fell on her shoulders, and reported that she Princess Estelle de Hartan from Hartan, although after one glance at her, it was clear. The boy could not believe his eyes, and then bowed his head to the princess and said that he greets Princess Estelle under the eternal glory of Hartan. Of course he recognized this young girl. Estelle told the boy that he saw how he had previously held a book by Velizovia, the Book of the End, and was glad that this book also seemed quite interesting. The boy was very surprised and said that he was amazed that the young girl read the Book of the End because it was a very unusual book. Then he wondered if he read Estelle sometimes, rethinking of the end. Estelle smiled and said that of course she read this book from beginning to end. Then the boy began to ask if she read The Illusion of Eschatology, to which the princess also received the approving response. Estelle sat down on the donkey and began to communicate with the guy about the books that she read and share the impression of their content. The boy said he had not spoken to such a worthy interlocutor for a long time. Satal stood away and decided not to interfere with the princess' conversation yet. Moreover, he never saw this boy so interested in communicating with a person. Meanwhile, the boy was getting closer and closer to the young princess, and then took a strand of her white hair and, having sniffed it, said that she looks quite appetizing and smells good from her. Estelle noted that she guessed from the first minutes of their acquaintance that this boy was not a man, and the boy, smiling, replied that it was worth expecting from such a reed princess. Immediately, the boy turned to the princess with his back and began to grow in size. A minute later, and Estelle was standing a staid, gray-eyed young man who introduced himself, the owner of the monthly charade. Estelle, of course, guessed that this boy was not a simple child, but she did not expect such an incredible reincarnation, so she looked embarrassedly at the man who, leaning over her, asked if she was missing. He approached the unacceptable proximity to the princess, La whispered, whether she does not want to conclude a contract with him, not with Satal. The princess was so shocked that she just looked at LOA. Satal was no longer going to endure the arrogance of the owner of the moon charade, so he threw it with the help of magical power so much that LOA flew a few meters. While Loa recovered from an unexpected blow and rose from the floor, Satal calmly said that he had warned him to stay away from the princess because he was not going to tolerate any of his pranks. Loa rose and guilty said it was only a joke. Satal, meanwhile, ordered him to find as much information about Count Bellu as possible, as well as find a decent outfit for Princess Estelle. After finishing everything he needed, Satal returned to a young girl and said that they finally finished all their business and could already return home. Satal turned and went to the exit, holding the princess's hand, who also followed him. She turned her head and looked at La, who rose and escaped her. Finally, La, smiling, said that he hopes that they would soon see Estelle and asked her to remember that the moon charade would always be open to Princess Estelle. When they returned to her in the room, Satal continued to hold her in her arms and said that he was a really big load for a person twice. The devil put the girl comfortably in the chair and began to comb her hair, helping to prepare for sleep. The princess thought about today's events and asked if LOA was really the owner of the monthly charade. Satal said that LOA was also a demon. Then Estelle wondered why the demon contacting people and playing the role of a high-ranking taverna owner who sells a variety of valuable information. The demon replied in a calm tone that it was just an entertainment from boredom related to immortality. Then Estelle asked why LOA was doing this among people. Then the devil said that the souls of people are easier to get because they are ready to sell it for at least the cost of information. And all the devils are constantly hungry, so they are happy to eat the souls of selling people. Estelle noted that a certain Satal belongs to some royal family, and the devil shared with the princess that he was the oldest and the most powerful among all demons. Satal added that LOA opens his true face only as a sign of trust, so Estelle actually reached something significant, which has deserved such boundless generosity on his side. And then Satal added that LOA is really very greedy, so Estelle should be extremely careful next to him. Then Estelle asked that she should know at the account of Sadael himself. The princess touched his hand, which lay on her shoulders, and looked into his eyes. She asked timidly if she should be careful when she was near Satal. The devil did not answer the question of the princess and just looked in her eyes silently. From such a frank view, Estelle did not. Then Satal suddenly asked Estelle what she thinks now. But the young girl was only sinking in his gaze, her answer frozen on the half, open her mouth, and looking at the seductive lips of Estelle, the devil began to approach her face closer and closer. Estelle understood why Satal was so close to her. Although the mind told her that she should climb immediately and go out of here, reading this brazen well, her heart did not want to listen to these nonsense. Estelle, who wanted to give up at that moment, only opened her lips a little and closed her eyes. After a moment, she felt the devil's hot lips on her mouth and a pleasant pleasure spilled on her body. The princess felt his hand confidently holding her face, as if she were not going to let the girl out of her strong hugs. Still, common sense has taken the mountain, and Estelle dared to get away from him. When their views met after a passionate kiss, Satal looked into the eyes of the princess and passionately said that Estelle should always remember that she was an attractive and special girl. The ice castle only showed its appearance and did not cause any significant changes. Therefore, the northern continent, which initially fell into great despair, gradually returned to his peaceful life. Rumors that the ice castle would bring prosperity and glory contributed to the false sense of peace and tranquility. Therefore, this castle turned into a symbol of the boundless glory of the imperial family Hartan. In the end, no research was conducted, and all of them referred to the castle as a habitual phenomenon. Meanwhile, Estelle read her favorite book sitting by the window. The unexpected princess wounded against a piece of paper, and seeing blood on her finger, got a handkerchief and wrapped it. She looked out the window and began to think about a recent kiss with a demon. She realized that the demon had given enough time for it to repel him, but the princess did not do it for some reason. Estelle was convinced that for him this kiss was only a means of achieving the goal. She was ashamed to remember that unlike her, who was constantly thinking about that kiss, the devil behaved as if nothing had happened and with a calm look continued to do everyday affairs. How many Essel remembered? She always had old worn clothes, her food was always cold, and her whole palace was terrified by unplanned rooms and a tone of dust that filled the entire interior. Since then, as in her life, Sadal appeared, the servants who had neglected their responsibilities before suddenly began to work, and the princess palace has changed to unknown. But most pleased and frightened the princess at the same time. It was that Era seemed to forget about her and no longer called Estelle to her room every time she became boring. The empress, who was constantly tormented by Estelle, has become unusually quiet lately, and although the princess felt much calmer, but still, something continued to be very embarrassed. Estelle guessed that the day when the empress met Satael, she had a clear eye on this handsome man and probably decided that he would not take any effort for her. From these thoughts, the girl smiled because this was the purpose of Satael, who decided to deal with the empress first. But she unexpectedly heard someone leaning on her and asked why she smiled. The Estelle was so scared that she rejected her husband, and when she turned, she saw that she was standing in front of her. She shouted, asking him as he went into the room so imperceptibly. The girl was so frightened that she did not hold a handkerchief that the wounded finger was wrapped before, and she fell on the floor. The blood from the wound began to release again, and Satal immediately noticed it. The devil kneeled before the young girl and took her for the wounded hand. He carefully examined the injured finger and told the girl that she should behave more carefully. Then Satal took the young girl's finger carefully and put him in his mouth. Estelle blushed again, but did not dare to pick up her finger. However, after a while, the princess pulled his finger from the devil's mouth. When Estelle looked at her finger, again, and there was no limit because the wound healed in her eyes as if there was nothing. The girl looked at her finger, then the devil, and thanked him for his help. Estelle asked the devil why he was constantly disappearing so unexpectedly and then appears when he needs it. Satal smiled and replied that he had to leave to settle some urgent cases. But the princess still decided to ask where this devil disappeared and asked about it. Satal came closer to Estelle and put on an incredibly beautiful necklace on her, saying that he went to meet with Count Bellew. The princess looked at this jewelry with interest, which flashed on her neckline, and guessed that most of all this was not a gift for her, but something that is directly related to Count Bellew. Sadal, as if reading the thoughts of the princess, told her that as soon as Earl Bellew would see this decoration on the neck of a young girl, he would surely be interested in this rare thing. Estelle squeezed the jewelry with a blue precious stone and thought it was a kind of exam, which she had to take at the request of this devil, so she became interested in what would happen next. At that moment, Estelle did not even want to imagine what a demon that had lost his soul can do. The princess guessed that Satal would perform the contract as it would be necessary. The princess thought that the devil would still do as she wants and would constantly assign her price. And if Estelle wants to control him, then she must create situations that will cause his curiosity. Therefore, having thought a little, Estelle asked the demon directly if he would handle what she would speak to Count Bellew. Satal, looking into her eyes, said that of course. Then the devil approached the confused Estelle and said that she would do everything he wants, and he would always be near, and if the situation goes out of control, he would definitely come to the rescue. Earl Bellew, meanwhile, holding a glass of a rare variety of wine, stood in the middle of the imperial hall considering guests. He thought that there was no one who would evoke his interest today. The earl recalled that he first met Era when he only reached his 18. Then he was in love with the girl he seemed to spend his entire life. The parents of young people arranged their engagement even before they were born, and when the children met for the first time, they made a solemn promise to get married as soon as they grow up. But this promise was never fulfilled, because during a visit to the far province, the emperor put his eye on a young girl. Therefore, very soon the emperor took her to himself without asking anyone. Neither the parents nor Earl Bellew could persuade the emperor not to touch the young girl. As soon as the emperor satisfied his lusty fantasies with a virgin girl, he threw her away, like garbage. Notwithstanding such humiliation, the young girl committed suicide. But except for her relatives and Earl Bellew, no one paid his attention, considering it a common thing. Earl Bellew, day and night tears were pouring behind his beloved, and just did not know how to cope with this loss. It was at this point that he met Eyre, who said he knew how to help the grief of the young boy. These two people were associated with the only goal, to take revenge on the Chartan Emperor and win him, because neither the betrayed Empress nor the grief of Earl Bellew could not forgive the Emperor. Ira wanted to strike in response to the Emperor himself, who not only constantly betrayed the Empress, but also left a pregnant princess of the desert, recognizing her child with her legal daughter. Gra Bellew has concluded an agreement with the Empress and became her lover. He tarnished the noble imperial type with his own seeds and their joint child. Acelon became the crown of this empire. But even this was not enough for Count Bellew to satisfy all his thirst for revenge and to fulfill it as perfect as possible. The Earl got to the very heart of power. Year after year, Count Bellew became an increasingly influential figure in the aristocratic society of the northern continent, and with the support of the Empress, could easily get anything. Earl Bellew had a love relationship with the Empress himself, the power to manage people at his discretion, and an extravagant pattern of unimaginable luxury. All this became a daily norm for the Graf. But all his thoughts were about a blue-eyed servant who was recently appointed to the Princess Palace. He was a small nobleman from the province who impressed everyone with his beauty. Ever since Era saw this servant, she has never invited Count Bellew. So now the Earl decided to somehow solve this problem, although he was tired of playing these games. From the reflection of Count Bellew, a beauty with platinum hair, which suddenly appeared in the middle of the hall and passed by him. But most of all, he was interested in the silver decoration that was on the girl's neck. This collar Earl Bellew would recognize anywhere and at any time. After all, he spent all his former savings on this gift. He immediately remembered the face of his beloved on the day he gave her this decoration. Estelle passed by Count Bellew and headed on an open balcony. Count Belgium immediately followed the beauty and, dropping the mask, asked her where she took this decoration. Estelle immediately turned and looked at Earl Bellew in his eyes. Of course, she very much wanted him to pay attention to her, but did not expect it to be so easy. So the princess smiled a man. Estelle said she had come to this ball masquerade to meet with Count Bellew. She saw that the husband's gaze was quite chained on her naked neckline, where silver necklaces glittered. Earl Bellew smiled happy and asked the girl if there would be at least one woman who would not want to meet him in the capital. He knew, of course, that he was in demand among all local beauties. Earl Bellew said if the goal of the girl is only to spend the night with him, then he should give up. Still, he has one request for the girl, namely, to tell him a necklace. Estelle listened to a confident speech of this arrogant rooster and said that it seems to her that Count Bellew thinks that he could get everything she only wants. But she has to disappoint him, because he is in fact deeply mistaken. Earl Bellew has not met such sharp rejection lately, so just smiling, saying that this was an interesting statement. Estelle asked if something was for the Graf that was a necklace. The Earl replied that of course it means a lot to him, and asked the girl if she would return this decoration to the Graf. Estelle suggested playing a game where the winner will receive everything he wants. The Count gleamed his eyes because he already imagined the winner and told the girl to tell him about the conditions of the game. Estelle reported that he should guess from 3 attempts who she was. The princess also added that he would have 3 tips. The Count gladly accepted the conditions of the game and offered to start. Estelle said that the first hint was that they met earlier. Earl Bellew immediately began to remember who he could meet with such bright hair, and the first thing he had thought was Lady Enrich. But when he heard the answer, Estelle replied that it was wrong. Earl Bellew was upset and said that the girl would tell him a second hint. Estelle said they had seen him recently. The princess rejoiced that the earl could not recognize her. Then the Count had a suspicion if this girl could be a Princess Estelle. He drove this idea because this confident girl was radically different from the princess. Count Bellew hesitated with the answer, so he suggested that I go immediately to the 3rd hint. The Count was convinced that as soon as he heard the 3rd hint, he immediately guessed who was standing before him. Estelle looked with a confident look at Earl Bellew and said that the 3rd hint was that she could give the Graf what he wants the most now. Earl Bellew glorified and put his hands on his chest. He asked the girl in a serious tone where she may know what he wants and how she can assert it at all. Then Estelle asked if his throne was interested. He was heard on the skin of the ant because he was always in the shadow of the Empress and dreamed of rule the kingdom on his own. Estelle came to the edge of the balcony and said that it was time for Count Bellew to think completely differently, but it would be a completely different conversation that they would continue next time. The princess confidently said that they would soon see and went from the confused Graf. He asked her to wait, because he never found out who was hiding under the mask. Suddenly, on the balcony appeared Sadel with his own person. He hugged his Rachel, and from his appearance came out such a wind that the earl, without seeing anything, covered his face with his hands. When the wind subsided and Earl Bellew opened his eyes, he saw that he was one on the balcony. Looking back, he did not find a mysterious stranger anywhere, because she disappeared somewhere. Sadel took the princess to the back courtyard of the imperial palace and carefully put on his feet. She asked if he watched her all this time, and the devil said that, of course. Satal smiled and asked the girl. She thought that he could send her to such a risky work. Estelle realized that, judging by his words, he watched her from the beginning. Estelle thought why he left her in the ballroom because she had never been to such events before, and it was so impressive that the princess was, of course, lost. The maximum of what she went to this day was a couple of banquets in the royal palace, and then she was dressed in an old outfit and sat in the corner, fearing even to move. No one ever sought a princess. No one was talking to her or even looking at her side. It has always been just a shadow of a ballroom, but today everything was completely different. He dressed a modern dress and accessories that the devil brought her. Estelle stood in the middle of a ballroom, and hundreds of pairs of eyes did not look at her. Everyone whispered, trying to guess who was hiding under the mask. The unusual situation in which the princess found herself at first confused her, and over time she realized that there was nothing wrong with this and took her hands, getting rid of nervousness. No one even guessed that she was actually a Princess Estelle, so the girl relaxed and could behave more relaxed. From this new feeling, Estelle was simply Kaifa. Estelle saw with her own eyes how Earl Bellew became the husband of the Empress and entered the center of power. Therefore she tried to raise it, asking such provocative questions. But Estelle did not even expect that she was watching her all this time. So she thought why the devil took her here and asked him if she did not make a mistake with Earl Bellew. Satal came close to the princess, gently hugged her and said that everything had gone even better than he expected, and asked her if Estelle liked to play this game. Now Estelle realized why he sent her one. This was due to that she began to communicate equal to those who looked at her from above. The princess realized that the situation has changed since today. Meanwhile, Satal, leaning in a bow, seemed to invite the princess to dance, but she hesitated because she did not dance for a long time, which she told the devil, adding that she had forgotten. Sadel only kissed her hand gently and said that there was nothing wrong with that, because he has not danced for thousands of years. She did not know how this devil made her heart beat faster. Sadel said they had to make sure that they remember how to dance. Suddenly, a pleasant tune was played, inviting young people to dance. The whole dance, Estelle has thought that the devil is very attentive to her, but he could lose interest as soon as she got what she wanted, so she ordered herself to be more attentive, suspicious, and vigilant. But the unexpected Sadel stopped and, pulling her to his pendant, suggested that he do a more interesting thing. She did not have time to be ashamed, as his hot lips had already kissed her. Estelle immediately captured some incredible drunk pleasure, and she was frightened that the devil could manipulate it, thanks to the new sense for the princess she began to feel lately. Although the princesses were very pleased with the princesses, and she wanted to plunge into them with her head, but she gathered, and pushing the devil, told them that it was time for them to return. He briefly replied that he would like it. After meeting the empress with the servant of the princess, every night she began to dream of nightmares, from which she woke up in a cold sweat. It was the same dream that was repeated from day to day. Ira came to air in a dream, a young man she saw once. But the desire to be with him was so great that he was tormented by the empress every night, and her vision was very realistic. From the desire that was constantly appearing in the empress, she all squeezed and screamed, and only when it seemed to her that she would die of pleasure, Ira woke up every time. She wanted the Satel above all. The empress wanted that servant to desire her in the same way, but she was very afraid that her birth of the baby from Belu and the desire to put him on the throne could turn into ashes because of her lustful desires. Of course, the devil himself, who came to her in the room and watched as she sleeps, contributed to her sharp desire. He understood that all people are lucky, and because of their sinful desires could burn in a few days. Satal knew that the flames in the hearts of people, this was not much labor for him. The girl who awakened him from the millennial sleep was radically different from everyone else. He did not know what it was forced to feel some other feelings in relation to Estelle. Satal wanted to treat her carefully so as not to cause her evil, and he also did not want her to repel him. Upon returning from the ball, Estelle felt the need to change something, so she viewed the documents and disappointed that, unfortunately, these were documents that were generally available for all. The princess decided that she needed to act more adequately to completely depend on the devil. Therefore, she made a list of nobles who took a neutral position and could sympathize with her. But these were only names. The princess lacked more detailed information, so she wanted to seek help from the monthly charade because she felt some strange desire to return there. The next morning, when the girl was about to dress, she felt someone touched her corset and began to lace up. Returning, she saw that she was standing in front of her. Estelle asked if he was specifically trying to frighten her, and Satal asked for an apology because he really didn't want to scare her. Ever since he became her personal servant, he is worried about all the needs of the princess in person. Satal coped skillfully with the most complex outfits and accessories, and he could put her hair with such a skill that no maid of the royal palace had. Therefore, the princess asked Satael if there were any things at all that he could not do. Satal asked that the princess was referring, and the girl explained that he did not take it. Everything is very good. Satal explained that he had so enough time that he learned to do almost everything. The devil tried to dispel his boredom and tried various things. Estelle felt some warmth at every touch of Satael, so she decided to change the topic and asked how LOA could turn into a child. The devil explained that it was because he was weaker than Satael. Sayal smiled and said that being the most powerful devil is a difficult task, and therefore you need to keep yourself in shape so as not to lose their skills. The princess looked at the devil attentive and decided that he was simply swaying with this advantage. And then, catching herself in these thoughts, she again slaughtered and ordered herself not to think about Sarael. From her thoughts she was detached by a maid, who reported that the Haiyan Empress had arrived, who ordered the princess to appear in the garden of the imperial palace immediately. Hearing this, Estelle was very excited. The princess thought it was quite unexpected, because Era did not cause her a long time ago. She said to Satael that she needed to dress, because she worried that the empress would again cut her new dress. Satal calmly noted that there was no need for this. Estelle again repeated that Ira was accurately angry, but the devil assured that no one would dare to raise his hand to Estelle. And while the princess looked at the devil, he gently kissed her in his forehead and said that the princess did not worry about anything. Immediately after Satael's words, the princess took her hands and gathered. On the way to the imperial garden, the princess reflected why the empress wanted to see her today. But when they came to the dining table, Estelle noticed that only Acelon was sitting there. Acelon, as always, smiled and looked at Estelle from head to heels. He noted that she was late again because the tea had already cooled. The princess bowed her head and greeted with crown print. He suggested that she sit down. And as soon as Estelle was comfortable at the table, she said that Her Highness wanted to see her from her, so she did not understand why Acelon was here. Acelon noticed that as soon as the princess would find out that she had called Acelon, she would not have come, and he has not seen Estelle for a long time, so he decided to go to such a trick. Summing up his speech, Acelon said that Estelle had never obeyed him, but the approval insisted on the answers, wanting to find out why he called it. Acelon, smiling, only stated that Estelle was always so cruel to him, and he only wanted to see her because he did not know what he was doing in this boring palace. Estelle's brother, who was younger than her only a few months, had a completely different status compared to the nameless princess born of a rabbi. He grew up, receiving all the love of others. As many as a child, Acelon was weak. Everyone in the palace was very worried and protected by Crown Prince. For Acelon, which grew up quite arrogant, was only a light toy that could be played with. When Crown Prince's favorite pony died, he played for several months from Estelle, who played the role of pony. Acelon was ruthlessly thrown by her whip. This case still mentioned the princess in her nightmares. So now Estelle could not believe that Acelon suddenly began to behave as if they were close brother and sister. She decided that it was his next game and waited for him only betrayal and approach. Acelon, meanwhile, looked at the man who went with Estelle and asked her whether her new servant was, noting that the rumors had already been filled with the imperial palace. Acelon, with a smile, said that Estelle is probably having a good fun with this servant, because her vulgar ancestral does not change. After these words, a treacherous blush appeared on the cheeks of the princess. Acelon asked if her mother was really Ileana, and began to say that the emperor had been so fond of a lecherous pungent from the desert that he could not even think soberly. Acelon added that this is not surprising, because he also likes to spend time with Estelle, who is the daughter of that pungent. The princess actually barely held back anger so as not to hit him with a slap. And then Crown Prince began to think that soon the cold would come and asked Estelle what she was going to do in this case. The Acelon replied that they should avoid cold. Hearing her answer, Acelon smiled again and said that she would have to lie down to the ground like a rat and escape from a snowstorm. Crown Prince said he would be closely following her. In Estelle, the patience broke into listening to his images, so she rose and said she had to go, but Acelon shouted, asking the girl who allowed her to enter because he did not give her such permission. And then Acelon defined a cup of tea and poured himself on his shoes. He said, looking at Estelle, that his shoes were now dirty, and asked the girl if she would help him with this problem. Hearing this, everything turned inside Estelle. She was familiar with this situation to Belle, and she thought that no one would always be stopped for her, and she would have to lick the tea from Acelon's shoes. Estelle decided that she was her duty, so she crossed her knees in front of Acelon. He smiled and waited until she began to lick tea from his shoes. But the unexpected everything seemed to stop. The princess had the feeling that she had lost control of her own body, and it was so strange that Estelle was closed in it. The girl could not even move. Estelle only heard the back to her saddle and asked why she was so easy to kneel before various scums. The devil leaned to her and whispered whether she wanted him to kill the Acelon for her. At the same time, with him, Estelle returned the ability to move, and she could finally breathe in the air. Meanwhile, Satal touched his hand at her face and said that he could kill everyone she does not want to see, and the princess would only be sitting on a well-prepared imperial throne. In fact, Estelle wanted to nod the surplus and deprive herself from humiliation from her brother. But it would not be the revenge that Estelle really wanted, though she always cursed Harton. The princess was outraged by their cruelty, which left incurable scars on her and her mother. But she was also half a harlotka, so she said she didn't want to finish everything. Sadal led the princess's hand and helped her climb. Suddenly the prince began to cough and crush blood. All the servants who tried to help the crown prince coincided around him. Estelle was shocked to look at this picture, and Sadal, putting her hand on her shoulders, whispered in her ear that he was an obedient servant, and did as his mistress wants and play with his images, holy, holy on the right. A beautifully dressed brunette with an attractive appearance came out of the carriage. The servants greeted her and offered their services. It was the Marquis Parcel, the owner of the monthly charade. Parcelius asked the Noiretsky that a new one had extended her an urgent letter, where she was asked to cure the crown prince from an incurable disease. After reading this, Persian quickly ran a corridor. The woman in a hurry shouted to the butter that she listened to this rest and ran into a room with a lot of books. She smiled happily and greeted with L.O. Seeing a little boy for a bunch of books, Parcelia said that today he was registering such a young child that she did not even notice where he was. Fishing grunted that if she continued to play the comedy in the same spirit, he would call her a Marquis Parcelia who mercilessly devoured her own husband. The woman smiled and said that he could do anything and that she had eaten the fresh meat of Marquis. And then she asked if Lord Satal really came here. The boy replied that Lord had recently visited him, and the woman continued to fall asleep with the questions that he had heard about it, why the ice castle was still visible, and what to expect from recent events. The woman asked to hurry up with the answers because she is not in humor today, and this flying ice castle paralyzes the entire empire, whose nobles have already ruined and lost their wealth. LOA called Bian woman and said he would tell her about everything. As soon as he spoke about Sadel's contract with Princess Estelle, Biana hit his fist on the table and shouted that it could not be. But the boy calmly replied that to believe or not, it was his problem, and he saw Princess Estelle with his own eyes. Bian then asked if he really was talking about the girl from the desert. La angrily replied that she did not call Estelle so. Then Bian smiled and noted that La was probably under the enchantments of the princess. She reported that they had received a request to cure the prince. Acelon has always been painful men, but this time the symptoms are somewhat unusual. Vomiting with blood, as well as constant chills, do not give the prince time to rest, as if it were stuck ice. Bian suggested that it is the case of Lord Satel's hands, so it is not surprising that the best doctors of the empire cannot improve the prince's condition on Graham, although they use all modern methods. At that time, Bian asked what kind of noise the princess was possessed, that Lord Satel descended from heaven and did such things, and LOA also stood on her side, although he had hated people before all his interior. Law said the princess had such an aroma that he had never heard before, and he is somewhat similar to Districts, but some other. If there was his will, he would have been drunk with his teeth into Estelle right now. La said that in any case, the Baoyan would also like Princess Estelle as soon as she met her. But here they unexpectedly heard a voice that they told them that they would not happen. Turning their heads, they saw an angry Sadel in the room, who looked at them close and said that he was not glad that he had a few more competitors. Bian immediately squeezed a sincere smile and greeted with Lord Satel. She asked that he had brought him into their modest room. LOA also looked at the main devil with a puff. Lord Satal immediately decided to go to the case and said Bian that he needed to help Estelle to enter the above aristocratic society of the Empire Hartan as soon as possible. Meanwhile, an advertisement was stamped throughout the empire, which offered an incredible reward for those who would help cure the hereditary Prince of Acelon, whose condition was deteriorating every day. Aira and even Ahastan, which usually did not show much curiosity in Crown Print, began to take extraordinary action to treat their son, attracting everything that only possible. And when Crown Print could not even rise out of bed, the structure of imitation of the throne also began to fail. And the reason for all this chaos was the joke of Lord Satel. The waves that Sadel jokes as in a regular game of water turned into a huge tsunami, which instantly swept the entire imperial palace of the Hartan Empire. Estelle also watched this for several days and pursued her desire to see the devil's kindness, although she did not believe that Satal was capable of mercy. Reflecting on the events of recent days, Estelle liked to look out the window, what she did every morning. But one day, a maid came to her, who reported that the princess had come a letter. The maid said that this sheet of Visa Marquis Parcelius. Estelle was surprised even more, because she has never received a single letter in her life, especially than such a well-known aristocracy as a marquis. The Marquise Parcelle was the richest widow and owner of the monthly charade. She was known as the queen of higher society, and all were ready to pay any money to become her friend. Estelle has been in surprise to read a letter where the Marquis invited her to the monthly charade and could not understand what was happening. The princess told the maid that she could be free, and the servant disappeared from the room. Estelle decided to give up such an occasion. It is just stupidity. And a day later, the Marquis sent a carriage after the princess. It looked as if the Marquis wanted everyone to know that Estelle had accepted her invitation. Already riding a carriage alone with Satal, Estelle thought that his facial expression is, as always, indifferent. She got the impression that everything was happening in his will, and she realized well why he did so. Estelle has been out of the field of view of society for so long that no one had a thought that it can take the imperial throne. Even when Acelon was seriously ill, everyone was looking for a distant relative, not a princess. Satal, as if reading her thoughts, said that he was going to use the Marquis Parcelli's power to take control of society. The princess herself realized that she had to somehow draw attention to herself. Estelle thought that during some incident, Many aristocrats could be attracted to its side, and this is the best strategy for linking connections and the fastest way to attract attention. Suddenly, Estelle asked Satael how long he would play with the health of the crown prince. Satael, with a smile on his face, asked what she began to worry about Acelon. The princess immediately began to deny, and the devil summed up that she probably likes to be the object of harassment. Then Satael approached her and whispered that he could help her. The unexpected carriage ran into a stone and was solicking so that Satael had not resisted and fell on the princess. She immediately blushed and asked him to stand a little, and he whispered that they had already arrived. As soon as they came out of the carriage, they were met by Marquis Parcille, who greeted the Princess Estelle and said that she was glad to see her in the moon charade. Estelle was amazed by the beauty of this woman. When they were in the room, the Marquise immediately began to pour tea. Estelle carefully watched her movements and asked if the Marquise was also not from the world of people. The woman looked at the princess. As soon as the Marquise coped with pouring tea, she asked Estelle as she guessed. Estelle explained that the Bogretsky usually serves tea and should know the aristocrats of such a level as the Marquis. The Marquise smiled and said that in this case the princess could be called just Bien. When Estelle agreed with this proposal, the Marquis noted that Estelle was an incredibly sweet girl. Then Bien suddenly added that Estelle was so sweet that she would not refuse to eat it right now. Satael said the Marquis to stop joke and went to business. Satael suddenly rose and said Estelle that he needed to leave for a minute because he was waiting for urgent affairs. He asked the princess to be alone with Bien. As soon as Estelle remained alone with Bien, the woman smiled her sweetheart and suggested that she spend time together. And for this, Bien said they had to go into another secret room.